Putin has sent a stern warning to Michel the Englishman. America must never dare to provoke Burkina Faso. Things are reaching a critical point. Stay alert because what's coming next will hit fast.
The sun had barely risen over Ouagadougou when the doors of the US Embassy slammed shut. Inside, phones rang off the hook. Staff moved with uncharacteristic urgency. A diplomat knocked twice on the ambassador's door, holding a sealed folder with a red stripe labeled Priorité présidentielle. À remettre immédiatement. Inside the envelope was a letter signed personally by Captain Ibrahim Traoré. The content, a shockwave. In the interest of national security and the preservation of our sovereignty, the transitional government of Burkina Faso hereby declares the immediate expulsion of 800 American nationals currently operating under diplomatic, security, and development pretexts. The silence in the room was suffocating. The ambassador reread the line. Then again, he wasn't just being asked to explain, he was being told, they're leaving, all of them, now. The 800 names weren't pulled from thin air. Every individual on the list had been tracked, from embassy aides and military contractors to NGO operatives and civilian advisors embedded near military zones. Burkina Faso intelligence had compiled a detailed dossier. Movements, meetings, encrypted calls, unexplained visits to military-adjacent regions. And now, the trap was snapping shut. Across the city, Burkina Faso security forces were already in motion. Airports received the alert. Border control was tightened. Surveillance teams were activated. By the time the US Embassy tried calling for clarification, it was too late. The operation had already begun. They called it Operation Clean Soil. Outside the compound, a small crowd had gathered. They held signs, silent but piercing. No more spies. No more puppets. Langley, go home. Inside, American officials realized the unthinkable had just happened. Traoré hadn't just rejected them. He had publicly humiliated them. And somewhere deep in Washington, someone picked up a red phone and said the quiet part out loud. He just slapped the Pentagon in the face. They weren't just tourists, they weren't backpackers or missionaries. The 800 Americans on Captain Traoré's deportation list represented one of the most embedded foreign networks in West Africa, and until now, they operated with near total impunity. Officially, they were technical advisors, NGO coordinators, and development specialists. But Traoré's intelligence services had been watching them for months, quietly, patiently, surgically, and what they uncovered was damning. A large number were tied to USAID projects, but not the ones helping farmers or building schools. These were resilience programs stationed near AES military zones. Traoré's cybersecurity units discovered several operatives transferring drone footage to encrypted US-based servers under the label environmental mapping, but the files weren't forests or rivers. They were military installations. Another group, operating under a health infrastructure partnership, was found photographing underground bunkers, water reserves, and high-security fuel depots. When interrogated, one admitted he had no medical credentials. His real job? Signal interception. Others were embedded in strategic ministries. Allegedly offering technical support, they were in fact providing daily reports to unnamed defense liaisons in Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana. Most explosive of all, a list of 12 American nationals flagged by Traoré's team as Tier 1 non-uniformed operatives. These weren't aid workers. They were suspected CIA assets, trained in counterinsurgency and psychological operations, posing as civilian contractors. And yet, not a single arrest was made. Traoré didn't want a hostage crisis. He didn't want chaos. He wanted the world to see what had been operating in plain sight, under flags of peace, behind smiles and aid logos. When the list was leaked to AES leadership, one general in Mali reportedly muttered, "They've been watching us like a zoo, and now we're kicking the zookeepers out." For years, the region had been a chessboard. Traoré had just flipped the entire board over. On the surface, it looked like routine diplomacy. Weeks before the deportation order, General Michael E. Langley, head of US Africom, arrived in West Africa on a stabilization tour. Photos circulated showing him smiling beside military officials, offering assistance for joint training programs and counter-terrorism support. But behind the flashbulbs and scripted handshakes, something else was happening. Langley's meeting with Captain Ibrahim Traoré was short, private, and tense. No press allowed, no transcript released. What leaked later from Burkina insiders was chilling. Langley reportedly pressured Traoré to restore strategic coordination with US forces. He insisted on reopening intelligence channels, resuming joint command exercises, and allowing non-disruptive American presence near AES defense zones. Traoré didn't blink. He didn't argue. He just listened and said almost nothing. But when Langley returned to Washington, a classified Africom briefing described Burkina Faso as increasingly uncooperative, warning that Traoré may be pivoting dangerously toward hostile states. That was the moment the line was crossed. Burkina intelligence detected an uptick in encrypted transmissions between US diplomatic hubs and military contractors in Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire. American operatives who had been dormant began moving, visiting key infrastructure, discreetly coordinating with local contacts. To Traoré, it wasn't diplomacy anymore. It was surveillance, intimidation, preparation. So he made a choice. He wouldn't wait for pressure to become sabotage. He wouldn't wait for a coup in disguise. He would move first. The deportation order wasn't just a reaction. It was a message, one aimed squarely at General Langley. And in a rare moment of sarcasm, Traoré reportedly told his chief of staff, "Tell the general we appreciated the visit. We just prefer to walk alone now." It wasn't a tweet. It wasn't a press release. It was a covert operation, written in ink and executed with precision. Burkina Faso called it Operation Clean Soil, a full-scale, silent sweep to remove every identified American presence deemed hostile to state security. The plan had been developed in total secrecy by Traoré's inner circle, overseen by a joint AES intelligence task force. No public warnings were issued, no embassy alerts were given, because this wasn't meant to provoke, it was meant to purge. At 4 a.m. sharp, Burkina Faso's elite security units mobilized. Dressed in plain clothes and moving in unmarked vehicles, they fanned out across Ouagadougou, Bobo-Dioulasso, and several strategic zones near the borders. Each team carried a sealed packet. Name, photograph, location, role, risk level. Targets included NGO headquarters, contractor compounds, media offices, even 2 luxury hotels rumored to house civilian advisors linked to foreign agencies. But the goal wasn't confrontation. It was containment. Each individual on the list was approached, handed a letter of expulsion, and escorted under armed supervision to pre-cleared evacuation hubs. In most cases, they were allowed 1 suitcase, a mobile phone, and an encrypted wristband for embassy coordination. Within 12 hours, over 600 Americans had been processed for departure. By nightfall, the first military chartered flight took off under AES air escort, bound for Ghana. No one resisted, because everyone realized one thing: Traoré was in total control. Simultaneously, border forces were placed on red alert. No re-entry. No rerouting. AES cyber teams cut data links suspected of relaying mission updates to external handlers. By the time Western media caught wind, Operation Clean Soil was already complete, and as Traoré reviewed a list of confirmed exits, he circled a name in red and reportedly said, "Let them tell Langley this: Burkina Faso is no longer their playground." The news hit Washington like a sledgehammer. At first, officials at the State Department dismissed the reports. Unconfirmed, they said, exaggerated. But within hours, classified briefings confirmed the worst. Hundreds of American personnel had been expelled from Burkina Faso under presidential orders. The initial reaction? Disbelief. Then fury. A closed-door meeting was immediately held at the Pentagon, led by Africom command staff and key CIA analysts. On the table, drone footage, intercepted AES communications, and internal embassy reports. The consensus inside that room: this wasn't about diplomacy. This was a strike. Langley, now back in DC, was said to be livid. He allegedly warned defense leaders that Traoré's move signaled a seismic shift in regional control, one that would weaken America's influence across the entire Sahel corridor. An official memo was drafted within hours, delivered to the US ambassador in Ghana and shared with ECOWAS. The United States views the mass expulsion of its personnel from Burkina Faso as a serious breach of bilateral trust and a dangerous provocation in an already fragile region. Behind the scenes, frantic calls were made to Ivory Coast, Ghana, and Nigeria, all US partners, asking them to help stabilize the narrative. One senior intelligence official reportedly told an African counterpart, "We need to make sure this doesn't become a domino effect." But it was already too late. Across Mali and Niger, AES leaders praised Traoré's decision as bold, justified, and historic. Pan-African media painted him as a symbol of resistance, a David standing against a military Goliath. Western media scrambled to reframe the story. But in the streets of Ouagadougou, the people had already decided. He didn't attack the West, he defended Africa. And in Washington, as new sanctions were debated, one chilling reality began to sink in. They no longer had eyes on the ground. Traoré had pulled the plug, and now they were flying blind. The United States had expected protest, maybe even condemnation. What it didn't expect was a military alliance standing united, not just in words, but in posture. Within 48 hours of Traoré's mass deportation order, the governments of Mali and Niger delivered a thunderous joint statement. "We stand with Burkina Faso. An attack on one of us is an attack on all. No foreign power shall define our sovereignty again." Across West Africa, those words sent chills and clarity. This wasn't an isolated decision by a rogue leader. It was a coordinated message from the Alliance of Sahel States, AES. And that message was simple. The era of foreign control is over. Immediately, the AES Security Council initiated Protocol 02, a rarely activated defense alignment plan that synchronized border surveillance, air defense coordination, and intelligence sharing between Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Niamey. Troops were mobilized, not to march, but to warn. AES drone patrols increased around US diplomatic installations in neighboring countries. At the same time, high-ranking generals from the three nations met in an undisclosed location, reportedly inside a hardened bunker outside Gao, Mali, to review long-term security implications of the US purge. Across regional media, the reaction was electric. In Mali, newspaper headlines read, "Burkina Faso delivers the blow we all dreamed of." In Niger, a viral cartoon showed Traoré standing atop a chessboard, calmly knocking over a king labeled Langley. And in Burkina Faso itself, protesters didn't riot. They cheered. They marched with drums and flags. They sang songs not of war, but of dignity. AES banners waved in the wind, embroidered with one phrase, "Un peuple, un bloc, une défense." One people, one bloc, one defense. At a time when the world braced for panic, AES stood like a wall, not aggressive, but immovable. The message was crystal clear. We didn't start this game, but we'll be the ones who end it. They didn't leave in a blaze of sirens or screaming headlines. They left quietly, in rows. One by one, the 800 Americans ordered out of Burkina Faso were escorted to the airport, not by violent mobs or chaotic police, but by disciplined Burkinabe commandos, dressed in black, faces stone cold, orders clear. It was a strategic choreography, controlled, efficient, and deeply humiliating. The convoy of buses rolled through the heart of Ouagadougou under heavy escort. Streets had been cleared, not for safety, but to ensure every movement was seen, and people did watch, not in silence. From balconies, rooftops, and street corners, thousands of Burkinabe citizens lined the evacuation route. Some waved AES flags, others held handwritten signs, Langley out. Africa is not your lab. This is not 1960. Some wept with pride. Some simply stood, fists raised in silence as the convoy passed. Among those being evacuated were former military advisors, USAID contractors, intelligence liaisons, embassy aides, and development specialists, all previously untouchable. But now they sat in silence, glancing out bus windows as a sovereign state reclaimed its soil. No arrests were made, no threats were shouted. The operation was deliberate theatre, an act of political dominance without a single act of violence. And then came the final image. As the aircraft doors closed on the final group, a Burkina officer stood on the tarmac holding a burned American patch, once part of a contractor's uniform. He let it fall to the ground as the engines roared to life. A journalist captured it. The photo went viral, captioned simply, "Exit complete." In Washington, the image was called provocative. In Ouagadougou, it was called justice. For the first time in decades, an African government had expelled US personnel and done it on its own terms. No coups, no coups backed by foreign hands, no apologies, only clarity. As the final US flights left Ouagadougou, another power moved into position, not with soldiers or threats, but with carefully chosen words. France. The Élysée Palace issued a carefully worded statement just hours after the last American departure. France remains committed to the stability and democratic development of Burkina Faso. We are ready to facilitate dialogue between partners to avoid escalation. But the timing was too precise, too rehearsed, too late. Behind closed doors, President Emmanuel Macron sent an encrypted diplomatic cable to Traoré's office. The offer: French mediation to restore international cooperation. In simpler terms, a reset. A chance to quietly walk back what Traoré had just done before it spun out of Western control. Traoré didn't respond. He didn't need to. Instead, the Burkina Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued a blunt, untranslated statement, written only in Maure and French. Burkina Faso is not seeking mediation. Burkina Faso is asserting its independence. That was the slap. Because for decades, France had played the role of referee in West Africa, stepping in when rebellions rose, when elections fell, when US interests were threatened. It had always been the fallback power, the fixer. But this time, France wasn't being asked, it was being ignored. In Paris, senior diplomats scrambled. A roundtable with African civil society leaders was organized to control the narrative. French media framed Traoré's move as dangerous, populist, and short-sighted. But in the streets of Ouagadougou, a new slogan had replaced the usual protests. Ni Washington, ni Paris, nous sommes nos propres maîtres. Neither Washington nor Paris. We are our own masters. AES flags flew alongside posters of Sankara and Lumumba. France wasn't seen as a friend anymore. It was seen as the last shadow of a colonial past, trying desperately to stay relevant in a region that had already moved on. It wasn't a rally, it wasn't a press conference. It was a moment etched in African memory. At exactly 7 p.m, the national broadcaster faded to black. Then the screen lit up. Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood alone on a stone platform in front of the Monument of National Sovereignty in Ouagadougou. Dressed in full military uniform, the AES flag and Burkina Faso's flag flanking him, fluttering in the wind. No script, no teleprompter, just the man, the silence, and the truth. His voice was calm, but sharp. They didn't come with tanks. They came with briefcases, laptops, and drones. They called themselves partners, but they listened more than they helped. Then he paused, eyes scanning the camera, speaking to every citizen and every spy watching. For decades, we were told who to trust, who to fight, and what we could dream. But those days are over. We will no longer host those who spy on us by day and sabotage us by night. Cheers erupted in the streets as the speech was live-streamed. He continued, Burkina Faso is not an outpost. It is not a base. It is a home. And no one is welcome in this home who enters with secrets in their pockets and arrogance in their hearts. He didn't mention the United States. He didn't need to. He didn't mention France. He didn't have to. His words hit harder because they didn't name names. They named truths. Then he turned to the youth. To the young Africans watching across the continent, remember this: freedom is not a gift. It is a fight. And today, Burkina Faso has chosen to fight standing tall. As the speech ended, the screen faded to the national crest, but the country didn't go silent. Fireworks lit the sky. Motorcycles revved in celebration. From Bamako to Niamey, crowds gathered to watch replays. For many, it was more than a speech. It was the declaration of a new era. And for Traoré, it wasn't about anger. It was about respect. By morning, the world had changed, even if it didn't know it yet. In Washington, analysts called it a diplomatic disaster. In Paris, it was an alarming turn in African populism. But in the streets of Ouagadougou, Bamako, Niamey, and Dakar, it was something else. It was freedom made visible. Traoré's decision to deport 800 Americans wasn't just a political act. It was a tectonic shift. For the first time since the Cold War, an African leader had said no to a global superpower, and meant it. No negotiation, no apology, no retreat. Burkina Faso had become the first AES nation to cleanse its soil of covert foreign influence, and do it in full daylight. The message had spread like wildfire. You cannot own what has already awakened. Universities across Africa held spontaneous forums. Is the AES the future of true sovereignty? In South Africa, students marched holding signs. Traoré showed us the way. In Cameroon, the phrase "clean soil" was graffitied across colonial statues. But with the celebration came tension. US military analysts warned that the AES expulsion could spark a security vacuum. Western media warned of Russia and China filling the gap. But in Burkina Faso, the mood was steady, confident. Traoré had already begun negotiations for Pan-African defense infrastructure, alternative technology partnerships, and a new intelligence-sharing protocol led by Africans for Africans. This wasn't isolation, this was self-definition, and while Traoré never said it directly, the subtext of everything he had done now burned across the region. If you treat us like children, don't be surprised when we grow up and slam the door. What happens next? No one knows. But one thing is now clear. Africa is no longer waiting to be invited to the table. It's building its own. And thanks to Traoré, the first chair has already been claimed.